Question of the day. I don't see anybody in here that would fit this description, but I'll ask anyway, so it might not apply to you. Sometimes I might say things that, that's not really hitting me at home, but I'm sure it's for the person next to me, So my question today that would not apply to anyone here, possibly, is do we have anybody in this congregation today who would describe themselves as stubborn? I read a funny online a meme that says it was the grumpy cat glory, and if you remember the grumpy cat things going around the internet, the grumpy cat unfortunately passed away this year, and we're still mourning his loss. But moving on, if we could possibly move along, there was a funny meme that says, "I'm not stubborn, my way is just better." And I don't know if that describes anyone today.
Amen.
Amen. I wasn't looking in this direction at all. Mandy's back there. Oh, okay. But everyone in our lives, has in our lives someone that we can think of, but it's never the one that we see in the mirror, is it? That says phrases like, "I could, but I just don't want to." Or, maybe some of us have thought this, going to work today, you would, instead of calling in sick, you want to call in stubborn. If anyone, maybe you've never said that verbally, but maybe you felt that way. You want to call in because you don't want to. Some of us have had something that they've had to do, and they've been putting it off. And perhaps, maybe this particular phrase resonates with you. And it's about procrastination. And let's see. The early bird catches the worm, but at the same time, procrastination pays off right this minute. You can think about that. If we think about this kind of idea, sometimes we procrastinate. Sometimes we're just plain stubborn. Sometimes that one person in our life that we're thinking about they just always say they don't want to. We are starting to get just a very, very small sliver of Jonah, of who he was. Jonah, in our Christian lives, we've heard the story about Jonah a lot, perhaps. Debbie has taught about Jonah probably a lot of times. And one of the things that we teach about Jonah, oh man, isn't it fun? He got swallowed by a big fish, and then he got spit out on the land. And that's the things that come to our mind when we think about Jonah. But let me just propose to you that Jonah was not about a fish. That story was not about a fish. In fact, the story of Jonah has nothing to do with a fish. So I kind of just ease your mind and maybe disrupt your religion a little bit by telling you that Jonah is not about a fish nor a whale. And let me just put this, I know a lot of you nerdy folks like me will come up and say, "Hey, did you know that the Bible actually says fish and not whale?" Well, yes. However, if you're a fisherman out there on the boat, you're going to be like, "Hey, check out that big fish." And it didn't matter whether it's a whale or a fish. Back in those days, they didn't talk about, "Did you know that a whale is a mammal?" They didn't talk like that. They just said big fish, big sea creatures. So let's just put that aside for a second. So, we're talking about stubbornness. We're talking about procrastination. We're talking about all of these things that we would not lift up as great qualities in your pious believer of today, right? In every story, in every epic story, there is a good guy or good girl and a bad person, or bad people, you know. And this struggle against good and evil is very real, and we always watch these movies, for instance, and we're rooting for the good guy, right? We're waiting for evil to finally, finally succumb to the good. And in this story, we have a very interesting balance between good and evil, a very interesting story between good and evil, because I'm just going to tell you that in this story, it's kind of hard to figure out who the good guy and the bad guy is. Because while we look at Jonah as the prophet, obviously he's a good guy, and we look at Nineveh as the bad people, oh, those are the bad people, well, we'll see about that. Let me just put it that way. Before I read this passage, I want to say that we're introduced to Jonah. And this whole month, by the way, we're going to be talking about Jonah. And we're going to be going literally through every chapter. We're going to be reading the whole chapter, so drink your coffee before you come in every Sunday, because we're going to be going through the whole thing. There's nothing that can be left out of this. Because we must understand what Jonah was going through internally, the war within. We're talking about this whole month. And we must understand what the result was of his struggle. So, I'm actually, thank you, Jess, you printed this out for me nicely. I'm actually going to be reading from the paper today as we read from that. But as you kind of follow along. But I want us to think about, when we're talking about Jonah, I want us to think about this good guy, bad guy. And I also want us to think about what his war was. What was it all about? Why was he such a stubborn person? Because remember, Jonah, if you've read anything about Jonah in your life, Jonah was a prophet called by God to preach, to preach about God everywhere he went. And sure, that was really easy in the places that received it really well. Maybe the places that he knew were doing some bad things, but he knew that he wouldn't be killed or anything if he went there. Maybe run out, yelled at, and then there's Jonah walking out. Oh, okay, sorry guys, but I did what I was supposed to do. Jonah, it seems like, lived his life in a checklist mentality. Okay, God told me to do it. Check that off. Okay, I'm going to go along with my life. But my question is, and I don't know the answer to this just by reading the book of Jonah, but was Jonah really, did he have a deep care about these people or not? Anyone he preached to in particular? Now, he did what God told him to do, I guess most of the time, I suppose. And he went in there and he did it, he came and he left, but was his heart truly given over to the one true God? I don't know. So we're going to read the first chapter of Jonah. And it gets really exciting here very quickly. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed to Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. I want to stop there for a moment. These sailors, they worshipped other gods, sure. But because of Jonah's sin, they had to get rid of all of their payload. Their very livelihoods were going overboard because this one man decided he was just going to say no to God. Okay. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fallen into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your own God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and it fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all of this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? Where is your country? From what people are you?" Stop there for a minute. You see, these folks were so scared, and their mind and heart, they just wanted to get out of trouble. So they called on all of these sailors. "Hey, I don't care what God you serve. It might not be the same one I do. Just call out to him, please, would you? Because whoever is not calling out to their own God, and if some of us perish in this, we're going to be able to point right to that person and say, this is your fault because you didn't call out to your own God." So all of them, let's get up. Let's start praying. Especially being out in the middle of the water was something that they were very afraid of. The fishermen and sailors were these big burly guys, afraid of nothing. So if you sail out in the middle of the water, you're known as a person with no fear. But yet, these sailors were afraid. So this is not just, hey, it's storming outside, we better get back to the shore. This was so much violence happening around them that they didn't think they were going to survive one more minute. So they look at Jonah. First of all, it must be you that's doing this, because you're the one sleeping. You're not calling out to any God right now. And we all know what's going on in Jonah's mind. Well, I'm not going to call out to my God. He told me to do something, and we're not on speaking terms right now. That could be a little awkward, right?
Right.
Hey God, by the way, you just told me to do something. I'm going the opposite direction, by the way. And now they're telling me that I need to phone up God and say, hey, can you save us from this? They ask him, what is his identity? Who are you connected with? Where do you work? Can I speak with your manager? You know, that's exactly what they're asking. He answered, this is, go on to verse 9 here. He answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Okay, this would be applicable here. This terrified them, and they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher. So they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? In their minds, they're thinking, okay, if we tie him to the middle mast, maybe, not let him do anything, maybe that will appease whatever God he serves. Maybe if we promise that we're going to imprison him when we get to shore, maybe that's going to help. But Jonah, this guy, verse 12, pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied. It will become calm. I know that it is my fault this great storm has come upon you. Now, this is the initial thought that we have about Jonah, right? Oh man, he was very brave. He said, throw me over. Because I want to sacrifice my life. Oh, Jonah. We feel sorry for him now? I'll sacrifice my life so that you can live. No, that's not what happened, folks. Let's not kid ourselves. Jonah was so adamantly opposed to doing what God says that he decided that he was going to sacrifice his own life so he didn't have to do what God told him to do. This is what we're seeing here. So, if I can get out of it, and hey, if you throw me overboard, there's a good chance I might live. So there's that percentage there. It might not be a great percentage, but at least it's better than going to Nineveh, like I was asked to do. Moving right along. In verse 13, instead the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. They cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased." Stop there once again. These guys knew, in their culture, if we worshipped a god and a prophet came along and we killed that prophet, that's not good news. And if you're telling me, and I'm seeing this with my eyes, that this God that you serve is the true God, obviously he can control seas, and I can only imagine what he can do on land. Well, in that case, if you're a prophet, let's put two and two together. I guess if I would have been a sailor then, my first question would have been, are you good with him or not? Are you speaking on his behalf or are you not? Are you doing what he's saying or not? Are you on this Lord's good side or not? But they were so terrified that, throwing him overboard was probably going to kill him. We didn't know, and if it did, we're going to be cursed. But Jonah says, no, you'll be fine. 15. They took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. So I guess something good came out of it. That by his sacrifice, people were saved. And then we go on to the next part where we're going to talk more about this next week. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. One of the things that we do say about the fish is, oh man, what great mercy the Lord brought upon Jonah that it allowed him to be saved in the belly of the fish. And I will say that this was the most miserable time of his life. So, let's talk about Jonah for a minute. We already have, but Jonah was called to go to Nineveh and preach to these people because Nineveh was a place of great sin. Sin city. What happens in Nineveh stays in Nineveh. I'm not going to compare it to any particular city in the United States. But let's just say it was a place of gambling. It was a place of prostitution. It was a place where violence would just spread wild and people were killing each other all the time. If you messed with someone, they had the right. It was lawlessness. Scholars believe, after reading through Jonah and some other things throughout the Bible referencing Jonah, that Jonah had some bad business dealings in Nineveh previous to this trip. Perhaps he gambled his money away or something happened. We don't know. Something happened. And it put a bad taste in his mouth to the point where he never wanted to go back there, and he hated Nineveh. Hated. And that's not too strong of a word. That might not be strong enough. But when he thought about Nineveh, oh man, those people. And in fact, I can even imagine, and this is paraphrasing, putting in stuff that's not there, but I can only imagine that God, he prayed to God that he would just absolutely wipe out Nineveh. Don't send me there because, who knows. Later on in Jonah, we do see this interaction between God and Jonah. Basically, Jonah is saying, don't send me there because they may come to know you and you're not going to destroy them. So he didn't say, please destroy them. He says, I'm afraid you're not going to. So there's the implication there, I guess, some backing.
Yeah.
He hated Nineveh so much. He jumped in this boat after God had told him, I need you to go there because people are dying without me there. And if they knew my love, if they knew my mercy, if they knew my grace, they would be saved and they would live abundantly and they would not have to go to these things that they're doing. But Jonah remembers Sodom and Gomorrah when no one would repent. And Jonah, in his mind, yes, do that. Yes, I would love to see that happen to this place. Jonah was the bad guy. I think Jonah was the bad guy in some senses, and in some cases, at some times in the story, it could go either way, I guess is what I'm saying. I think that I can honestly say there have been times in my life where I've met people or I've talked with people who knew someone else who their attitude towards that person or towards that people group was, God, you better get him. Right? Because they hurt our feelings. They said something they weren't supposed to say. They brought up something that still kind of hurts us. Perhaps they directly hurt us, and maybe they meant to hurt us. But our response to that would have naturally been, oh Lord, I can't wait till that comes. Can't wait till they get what's right for them. Then we start talking about karma, right? Oh, I can't wait until it comes back on you. By the way, karma is a pagan idea. Can we just get rid of that? The God of the Bible has nothing to do with that. Because if God we know and love and trust truly exists, then all of us are going to get it. Okay? Can we just be honest with ourselves? My sin is just a different form of your sin. Okay? Let's just get rid of that. Let's, instead of talking about karma, let's start talking about things like, I don't know, revolutionary grace and mercy. Praying for them to rise above. Okay, well that's my browbeating for a moment. Okay, so Jonah was about to do everything he could in his power to keep from doing what God has asked him to do. And when we look at Scripture, we realize that God is sitting up there, patient as He is, watching Jonah do this. How many times have we done that? That God has asked us to do something, we make an excuse such as, I don't know, Lord, I don't know if I can, because look at the resources, look at my influence, look at what I have before me. So Lord, you must be closing that door because I don't have abundance and I'm not going to be comfortable in this. You know what I'm saying? And God just smiles at us. And He says, okay, but the natural byproduct of you running away is running right into discomfort, pain, fear. Running away from God means you're running to those things. Jonah could have had a fairly comfortable situation. Think about this. If he goes to Nineveh and it goes terribly wrong, either he's run out or he's killed, right? But the journey there was a whole lot worse than even that. Because he decided to turn the opposite direction. The best case scenario is that he goes there and God protects him in the impossible situations. That those people who are horribly violent, who gangs have taken over, who there's just no law, and all those kind of things. The worst case scenario is that he dies. The best case scenario is that he lives and who knows what happens. But he does what he's supposed to do. So yes, the Lord provided this huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Next week we're going to be talking about a prayer that he prayed while in the belly of the fish. This prayer, by the way, wasn't like, oh God, this is great accommodations. I really appreciate this. Wow, he has a nightstand and all that kind of thing. Well, this is beautiful. All like a, we have a free breakfast buffet here. This is fantastic. He did not get high accommodations for this. But throughout the book of Jonah, what we're going to see is that there was a war that was going on within Jonah. That if he would have just done what God had told him to do, things would have ended very differently for him. Or gone very differently for him. The book of Jonah, and I know that we're, in a whole month, we're going to be going through it, and as a pastor I need to leave you kind of on the edge of your seat. But I'm going to tell you how this ends. Not well. The book of Jonah is not your typical story like, oh yeah, the good guy won. The book of Jonah, I'm just going to tell you at the very end, we're sitting there like, wait a minute. It's not a happy ending. Like I figured, you're reading this whole thing and you're thinking about, okay, how is Jonah going to be redeemed and how is this going to be this wonderful epic story? But at the end of Jonah, you're sitting there thinking, what did I just read? That doesn't leave me with a happy thought. This is maybe one of the few stories I'm going to tell you that does not have a good ending. Sure, the people in Nineveh get saved. Spoiler alert. But the journey there and the journey after is something that we need to talk about. So, I'm not stubborn. My way is just better. This is this guy. He would have done everything that was in his power, every resource that he had, every prayer that he could pray to not do what God was asking him to do. And we can look all day at Jonah and say, Jonah, why in the world did you not do what God has told you to do? You would have had people saved and amazing stories could come out of this. But Jonah had such darkness in his heart, such a hatred for his fellow man. So he wanted his way and he wanted no other way because his way was right. And that led him to his own destruction. Did he die again? No, of course not. But it surely wasn't a great ending. So, as we go throughout this month, talking about Jonah, let's start thinking about this. Is Jonah in me? Am I Jonah? Is God constantly asking me to do things, prompting me to go in directions that I'm just plain saying no to? And the next question I want you to ask, if the answer is yes, ask yourself why. Because you don't have enough money? If you don't have enough people around you? You don't have enough people cheering you on? I don't know if you know this, but you and God is a majority. His resources are abundant. Never ending. God is love. The reason that God put Jonah through this thing that was going on, which seems it's kind of harsh, God, don't you think? But he loved those Ninevites so much that he was willing to sacrifice a son of his. Interesting. Later on in the New Testament, we find that Jesus was talking about the sign of Jonah. What we often talk about is the 3 days in the belly and then spit out on the third day, and that's the resurrection story. But that's not the full sign of Jonah. The other part is loving humanity so much, he was willing to sacrifice one of his own. God is not loving, He is love. Stop being a Jonah, would you? I don't need to put any flowery message behind that. Just quit it. It's like how I do my tithe talk. Instead of going into this flowery why you should give, just give. Come on, let's quit messing around. I just wish pastors would do that more often. Go on the 16-month series of why you should give to the church. Like, come on, let's just quit messing around. Stop being a Jonah. Because if we follow God, He will make our path straight. I've read that somewhere. If He leads us beside waters, the waters will be still. There are so many times in Scripture where water is used to show that fear, to show that discouragement, to show that pain and anxiety going on in the community's life. And God is trying to teach us something. Jonah is a great example of that, because God used that to bring people to their knees. Part of the original mission was not necessarily to go on that boat to go to Tarshish. But it's amazing to see how God used that disobedience to still, God's in the business of saving. And this whole boat came to their knees and they worshiped and they sacrificed to the one true God. It's like, on my way, okay, while you're disobeying, while you're throwing your toddler tantrum, I'm still going to get some people saved, so there you go. Every one of us has one of those tantrums. As we transition into prayer, I'll call the praise team out. I want us to really reflect on that. Is there some spiritual tantrum that we're throwing right now in our lives? That we would just as soon walk the other direction than say yes to God. Because we know if we say yes to God, it's going to mean work. It's going to mean maybe even getting someone saved that I don't like. But God so loved the world. So, they're going to sing, and you can come up here to the altar if you have some business to do with God. You have some praise, some petitions, you really need something to work out in your favor this week. But I'm going to sing a couple songs, and then I'll meet you back.